it is real or it's not. There's no levels or gradient to it, right? Good. So the reason why we're bringing up this idea of physical and non-physical, the relationship between these two, the idea of what nature may be, and also a little bit of what may be a cause, all have to kind of revolve around the metaphysics of Aristotle. All right, so we begin our lecture today with a look at what Aristotle's contribution to metaphysics and philosophy was. Some recommended readings, excerpts from pages 25 and 26, right, to get a little bit of more of a background. But I also provide a video here that kind of helps us to get a starting point from Aristotle, right? Reminder that the big three in philosophy, right, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, are connected, right? There's a lineage there, right? Socrates was the man in the public square, kind of, venting his views on the world, philosophy, and politics. Plato was, this young guy that would follow him around and started kind of writing down his notes and his ideas. And then he started a school where Aristotle became one of his students as well. So that was kind of the lineage there. But the idea today is to see what the differences are between Plato's metaphysics and Aristotle's metaphysics, right? If you remember the theory of forms, it was pretty abstract, right? So we're wondering if Aristotle decides to stay with the theory of form, if he amends it, questions it, or if he kind of comes up with something completely new, right? So here's a little bit of a bio on Aristotle.
Aristotle is one of the three most important Greek philosophers, along with Socrates and Plato. And together they really laid the foundation for Western philosophy, for Western civilization.
Aristotle not only invented logic, was the first systematic investigator of biology. His most important work was in the realm of metaphysics, namely the study of the structure of reality.
Aristotle was born around 384 BC in Stagira, a small town in northern Greece. His father, Nicomachus, was the court physician to the Macedonian royal family. In his boyhood, Aristotle first studied medicine before going to Athens at age 17 to study at Plato's academy.
As one of Plato's prized students, Aristotle formed a different point of view than Plato.
Plato would simply believe what existed without trying to explain it, without seeking deeper meaning. In contrast, Aristotle would question everything that was presented to him to the point where he was able to discern the very minute details and not only understand what each of them represented, but how they all fit together into forming a larger system.
After Plato's death in 347 BC, Aristotle left Athens to live in Mysia, now part of modern Turkey, where he married and had a daughter. Aristotle returned to live in Macedonia in 338 BC, when King Philip II asked him to tutor his son Alexander.
It was a great honor for Aristotle to be chosen as the tutor for Alexander the Great when Alexander was only 13 years old.
When Alexander the Great assumed his father's throne at age 21, Aristotle returned to Athens and started his own academy, called Lyceum.
Aristotle's Lyceum was a rival school to Plato's academy, and the main difference was the curriculum. Aristotle's curriculum was centered on scientific observation and research. Plato was more dedicated to mathematics.
Aristotle wrote over 200 treatises on so many different topics. Collectively, Aristotle's work really lays the foundation for what we now consider a liberal arts education.
After Alexander the Great died in 323 BC, the pro-Macedonian government in Athens was overthrown. The resulting anti-Macedonian public resentment forced Aristotle to leave Athens for his own safety.
Aristotle went to his mother's town of Chalcis on the island of Euboea. There, we don't know what he did. He only lived another year.
At age 62, Aristotle died in Chalcis in the year 322 BC.
The most important impact that Aristotle has on our society today is that he has left this legacy of organized thought, and Aristotle stays with us every time we make a list.
Aristotle came up with the notion of empiricism, the the idea that to understand the universe, you need to observe it and measure it and try to really look at it. And of course, this is the basis of the modern scientific method that all scientists use today.
All right, so we're looking at Aristotle, right? We're looking at the contributions of Aristotle's viewpoints, and specifically his metaphysics, right? So just like any good student, I would say, Aristotle starts out by learning from Plato, right? In other words, he studied the theory of forms. But like any good student, he also kind of challenged it thereafter to develop his own views. Again, we're trying to figure out what reality is, right? And so currently we have Plato's theory of forms. If you remember from last time, it was pretty abstract. So I want to kind of go over it just so we can get a bit, at least a good understanding as to how Aristotle is going to kind of go against it. All right. So first and foremost, we have this dualism, right? Whereas before with the pre-Socratics, the world, the universe could be broken down to one singular substance, right? For Thales, it was water. For Heraclitus, it was fire. Parmenides said it was all one materially connected piece, whereas Pythagoras said it was, numbers, whatnot. The contribution that Plato kind of brought upon the world was this idea that perhaps there's not just one substance. Perhaps there's two worlds, right? There's two types of realities, like almost like a physical and non-physical reality. So it's kind of the first time we see this dualism happening in metaphysics. For him, the physical world down here is imperfect and always changing. In other words, it is flawed, right? Whereas the world of the forms, which is in this, abstract ether of sorts, is perfect, unchanging, static, right? And infinite, right? And so we get the first time really between these two worlds. Now, he doesn't go ahead and call it physical and non-physical, or body and mind, or anything of that. He uses sensible world, in other words, the world of the senses, and then again the world of the forms. Again, other ideas, everything we see in the world of the sensible world down here is flawed copy of the ideal form, right? Somehow that realm of forms shines its light upon the dark world down here, and that's how we kind of see imitations of those forms. True knowledge, real understanding, comes from grasping these forms, not just from sensory perception. So in other words, you don't have true knowledge unless you really understand these concepts or grasp these concepts, right? And lastly, he gives us his cave analogy, not just to kind of talk about what he sees the role of philosophy or a philosopher may be, but really like what his views on reality are. Right? Literally, the world inside the cave is the metaphor for our physical world down here. And the world outside the cave is the world of forms that only certain people might have access to. Right? So there's this, rational world that you access through maybe deep philosophical thought, according to Plato. And so that's kind of where we start, Plato's theory of forms. Some of you have probably seen this painting before. It's one of the more popular masterpieces. It's called The School of Athens by Raphael. Raphael being one of the greats, right, alongside like Michelangelo and Leonardo and Da Vinci, right, and whatnot. Raphael painted this, I guess, more like a representation of the School of Athens, but really I think the key to this painting is that he didn't just paint the philosophers as their aesthetics. He tried to include a little bit of nuance in there. In other words, by kind of looking at their works, looking at their philosophy, and seeing how he can incorporate that into the painting, right? And I think that's kind of one of the cool aspects of it. In fact, if you look there at the very center, right? I mean, he puts Plato and Aristotle right smack dab in the middle to show you, I guess, the importance of those two philosophers. He also kind of gives us a little bit of the nuance in their metaphysics by looking at the way their arms are, right? If you see, Plato is kind of pointing up, right? Whereas Aristotle's kind of putting his hand like this. Just kind of, randomly here, what do you guys think that means? What was Raphael's intention of painting Plato and Aristotle with these hand motions or these hand gestures? Anybody want to give it a shot?
Is it like Plato is pointing up and Aristotle's like pointing towards like the person itself? As in like Plato is pointing to heaven? Just a guess.
Okay, and perhaps not. You're right, but perhaps not heaven. What do you, based on his views, what do you think he's perhaps pointing at?
Maybe an afterlife, or I don't know.
Close. Any others?
Maybe they're just talking about the weather. You're like, I think it's gonna rain, and he's like, nah, chill.
Right. Good. Think about the allegory of the cave. Think about his metaphysical theory of forms. Anyone?
Maybe Plato's not necessarily pointing up, but trying to show that there's one world. And
Okay.
Aristotle's like, well, I don't know about Aristotle, but it looks like it could be pointing up for Plato or just trying to signify there's only one reality.
Okay. Good. I think these are all good guesses. Here's what I would say. Remember, for Plato, the world, quote unquote, down here is the physical world, is not as real. So he's putting priority on the world of forms. I don't know where that's at. I don't, the least we can say is maybe up, but like, that world up there in the abstract, right? Technically, if it's not physical, it shouldn't have a location, right? But, that's the best way to show it. It's like, no, that other world is more real than this world. Remember, Plato is a dualist. He says this is a world, and then there's another world. That other world is the real world, right? Or the real reality, I should say. But Aristotle, and based on his metaphysics that we'll see here in a bit, puts his hand like this and says, no, like, it's almost saying like, no, chill, like, stop. This is the world down here, the physical world, where we're at right now. This is reality. Right, not up there, not in your mind or the world theory of forms. Like maybe down here is the world of forms, right? So that's kind of the first clue you get as to how they're going to differentiate when it comes to metaphysics, right? In other words, what their views of reality may be, right? So again, like any good student, he starts to question his teacher, and we look at some of the questions that Aristotle might ask Plato. First one, how do these perfect forms actually affect or interact with the things we see in the world? In other words, you're talking about this form world realm somewhere, and then you have the physical world that is a shadow of that. But how is that shadow cast? How does that form interact with the actual physical object, right? Because you can have the form of a triangle, say, and they can have an actual object that looks like a triangle, say like a pizza, right? A pizza slice. So how does the form of the triangle connect to the actual pizza? Like how does it interact, right? In other words, I mean, that sounds kind of weird, right? Like, is there a literal physical connection? And to kind of push the idea further, how do you connect a physical thing with a non-physical thing, right? You have a physical, and I always kind of saw it like as a metaphysical bridge, right? If on one end you have a physical piece of land and on the other you have a non-physical, and there's a bridge between the two, at what point does the bridge stop being physical? Right? It's like, does that mean it's like half a bridge? Right? Is that what it would be? But that's kind of his first question. The second question: if every perfect form needs another to explain its perfection, wouldn't that lead to like an endless chain? And if you remember from the other lesson, we saw the divided line for Plato, and he had hierarchies, right? We had the lowest reality, then we had low reality, then we had high reality, then we had the highest reality. And what he's saying is like, if there's gradients, if there's like a ladder of sorts of reality, can it just keep going? And then like we'll be stuck in this chain of just like, no, this is real, but then there's a form of like perfection, and there's a form of, he says, can things just go on forever? And it doesn't make sense. The next question: aren't our senses reliable enough for understanding instead of relying on hidden forms? In other words, if we're asking questions about the nature of the universe, are our senses not good enough? I mean, we can see things, we can feel things, we can hear things, we can taste things. Are these not good enough ways to learn about the world around us? Is the only way to really know is these forms that are hidden that not everyone can access unless they really think about it? And what if people have like, I don't know, like a mental disability and will never be able to rationalize like that? Does that mean that they're not real, or they'll never know reality? Right? It doesn't make sense. Number 4, if forms are unchanging, right? Because remember, the world of forms is somewhere out there, doesn't change, it's perfect, but it's static. How do you explain the constant change around us? But what about this physical realm we're in? It seems like motion is an important aspect of reality. Why does the motion down here affected by something that has no motion? Right? So, what's the relationship between that? And then finally, if we can't directly access the forms, in other words, if they're not obvious, how can we be sure they exist in the first place? Right? And I think this is a very important question for Aristotle, because it kind of shows him his empirical methodology. In other words, for him, he kind of starts to favor the idea that unless it can be observed, right, or perceived, then you can't say that it exists. In other words, it's a very scientific view as opposed to Plato's rationalist, idealist concept of truth. For Aristotle, it's like, no, it has to be down here. We have to see it, observe it, and if we can't, then we can't surely know that it exists. Right? Not saying that forms don't exist, but he's saying, where's your proof, Plato? Right? So again, and he does a couple of things. I think he really makes his metaphysics something that could be accessible by a lot more people. Right? He's saying, it's like, no, you don't have to be this smart philosopher to see the reality of the world you live in. You just open your eyes and observe, and that's what you will get. Right? All right, so back to the question of form, right? For Aristotle, he didn't really throw away this idea quite yet, I would say. In fact, he keeps this idea of form. He likes the idea of form, but he kind of redefines it. For Plato, again, the forms were ideal and static and perfect and existed some weird abstract realm. For Aristotle says, no, I think form is more like the shape or the design. The form is really more like the boundary of an object. In fact, the boundary to the object's substance and mattering. It says almost all objects, in fact, I guarantee you that all objects that are said to exist in our physical universe have two things: have material substance and a boundary or shape or design to it. So he says That is what reality is when you get the form of the object and the matter of the object and you put it together and then the object becomes what it is. That is reality. And he calls this process hylomorphism, being as a combination of form and matter. He says you can't have one or the other. It has to have both in order for the object to be. Right? So let me give you an example of that. All right, here we have a picture of a basketball. Right? Can someone come off mute and tell me what is the form of a basketball?
A sphere.
Sphere, right? Like the shape, the design of it, right? Good. What is the substance of a basketball?
Latex rubber, I think. I don't know the actual
Right,
material.
like rubber, leather, right? If you're poor like me, maybe it was plastic. I don't know.
Does
And
that going to be air?
air could yeah, for sure. Like you need air that too. So anything that makes up the basketball. Now, can you play basketball with just the form of the basketball?
No, you can use many different like types of like sports balls. It doesn't have to be just a basketball.
Okay. If I gave you a triangular shaped basketball, would you consider that a basketball? Like a pyramid?
No.
No. Why not?
It can't bounce.
Yeah, well, it's not round. So I think you can play with, as long as it's the form of the basketball. Yeah, you can play because you have the net, so it fits in.
Okay, good. Now, for some of us, it's like it's going to be very difficult, right? Because if it bounces, it's not going to bounce the way we're used to it for basketball. So for Aristotle, he says you can't have a basketball without the form of the basketball and the substance of a basketball. If I said something like, "Hey, pass me the sphere of the basketball," only, how would you do that? You can't. Or if I said, "Hey, pass me the substance of the basketball," what do you do? Just pass me the piece of leather? Right? Is that a basketball? No, it is not a basketball until you have those two things: the hylomorphism, the form, and the substance. Right? Same thing with a football. I mean, even the baseball, the tennis ball. Besides size, the material is different, right? The tennis ball has that furry, fluffy, usually yellow type of material. You wouldn't say that that's just a small basketball. No, it's a tennis ball. A basketball has a certain design, right? Yes, they might have similar forms as other balls, but for the most part, you need a certain size and design. So Aristotle kind of takes all this idea into consideration. Obviously, there weren't any basketballs at his time, but he says any object that we can say exists in this universe is said to have both form and matter. Right? But then let's continue that process. It sounds pretty good. It sounds interesting, and it sounds pretty basic, right? Pretty common sense, as opposed to this idea, oh, there's a world of forms and it shines its invisible, immaterial light upon the shapes down here, and the shapes down here aren't that real. They're kind of fake and imperfect, and so this is like half a reality, and that's the true. It's like, no, dude, the form is just the boundary to the object's matter. The form of sphere, is the boundary to the leather, the air, right? And so it becomes a basketball when those two things, right, coincide, right? But what about things like, I don't know, the soul? Is the soul form and matter? Is it just form? Is it just matter? Does it even matter? Right? So, in other words, I don't want to say what your views are, but for Aristotle, do you think, how would Aristotle answer this question? Is the soul form and matter, just matter? What do y'all think? Knowing what you know about form and matter, what would be the soul? Anyone want to give it a shot? All right, some of you are still having some thinking time. Let's go
Yeah,
on.
I would say I would say matter because it's kind of what makes the person. So if you want to use like substance of the basketball, that's what I believe. Like it's a matter thing.
Okay, so the soul is actual matter, like physical matter, you would say.
But because I think it creates a person. So yeah, I would think it's a physical matter.
Right. And if it exists in the physical universe, it must be physical too, right?
I'm on the other side of the fence.
Okay.
I think it's form because I think soul is kind of on the unphysical side, and it's what creates us in a sense. Like like my mom, I tell her she have an old soul, but it's like that's what makes her like that's what makes her want to hang around older people and not understand the younger generation and stuff like that, if that makes sense.
Okay, so the soul kind of gives us our perhaps personality as well, right? Now, again, the idea here, y'all, is, or Brianna says maybe both, maybe substance matter, is whatever your metaphysical view may be, that at least at some point you're able to kind of explain it, right? And that's the idea here, is be able to understand Plato's metaphysics, be able to understand Aristotle's, and then at some point, after maybe perhaps going into Descartes and modern science, you can start to kind of, shape your own metaphysical views as well. All right, so let's continue. Some important terms for Aristotle's metaphysics. We've already kind of talked about the first three, right? Substance is what the object is made out of. Form, it's its shape, structure, or boundary. When you combine the two, it becomes what he called hylomorphism, right? And then it becomes what it's supposed to be. Then he talks about two other ideas, actuality and potentiality. He says every object down here has both of these ingrained within it as well, right? Call it motives, call it processes. Doesn't really kind of talk about it just like in those terms quite yet. But what is potentiality and actuality? Think about it as like a plan of sorts for the object to grow, to move, and all these ideas. So, for example, an acorn, when planted, is going to grow to be a tree, right? Maybe like an oak tree, right? There's never going to be a time where you plant an acorn, and then all of a sudden you get, oh, look, a pumpkin grew out, right? In other words, there's a certain design element within the acorn that tells it you're a tree and you're always going to be a tree. And if planted right, you're going to become that. In other words, a seed or the acorn is a potential oak tree. Once it actually becomes a tree, it is what Aristotle calls actualization. It has been actualized, right? He says all objects have this potentiality and then they have this actuality. And what allows one object to move from potentiality to actuality is what he calls motion. Motion is akin to what we perhaps define the word nature as. For him, motion in nature was almost like the same thing. Because, think about it. We live in a physical universe. If you remove motion, and time is kind of a byproduct of motion, right? Or vice versa. If you remove that from the universe, you remove motion from the universe, what happens? The answer is nothing happens. Right? Instead of the movie that we see, it's just like a static screen, right? So for Aristotle, motion is the underlying kind of nature of the universe that helps to move an object from potentiality to actuality, right? So, and for me, it's kind of like when I see, students in the classroom. To me, it's like you guys are potential graduates, and then I see you guys walk across the stage, in May or whatnot, and it's like, oh, they have actualized that purpose or whatnot. And that's kind of also ingrained in reality for Aristotle. It seems like all objects are moving from potentiality to actuality as well. Right? And so Aristotle kind of gives us this nice little package that includes all his views on metaphysics, and we call the theory of Aristotle's 4 causes. All right, so I want you to watch this video, and then we'll kind of do a deeper dive into it.
This is what knowledge is. We want truth. Yes, we want there to be some correspondence between what is in our minds and what the world is like. But you can have truth without knowledge. How is that? Because for Aristotle, to know something is true is to know the causes for the thing. Aristotle distinguishes 4 different kinds of causes: the material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause. I'm going to go through each one of those. They're very important to know, and I'll try and illustrate with this apple. The material cause first. That's obvious to most of you. There's matter that makes up this apple. It's the sort of thing you could study in chemistry, for example, the sort of chemical makeup of this apple. And there are some views in the modern world that the matter is all there is, that material causes or physical causes can explain all of reality. But here's a thought experiment. Take this apple and press it down. Grind it down until it's just pulp. And then ask yourself the question, is that still an apple? All of the matter is still there, but something has changed. What? Aristotle says that's the formal cause. All of nature is comprised of a combination of material and formal causes. It's the form that makes things what they are. Aristotle uses a technical term for this. He calls it hylomorphism. The Greek word hyla means matter, morphe means form. Everything is composed of matter and form, and it's the form that ultimately explains the reality we see around us. I mentioned 2 of the causes. There's a third. What caused this apple to be? It didn't just pop into existence out of nowhere. It came from a tree. And the tree developed and matured and made fruit. And inside the fruit are the seeds of the apple. And then the apple fell from the tree. So the efficient cause for Aristotle is what begins the motion, which originates, which brings that apple into its existence. Now we have to get to the final cause of the apple. And that is, notice this about this apple. This apple, if it falls to the ground and becomes properly embedded within the soil and receives enough rain, will start to grow into another apple tree. It has, therefore, what Aristotle calls the potency. It has the potency in it to become something more mature, more developed. It is then, and this is Aristotle's great innovation, what is an apple? Aristotle will tell us an apple is an immature apple tree. This is an apple tree. Ooh. At a very high degree of potency and a low degree of actuality. When this apple grows into a full apple tree, it is the most what an apple is. Its potency has been actualized. As Aristotle understands it, those causes go back eternally. The world eternally goes back in efficient causes. But Aristotle doesn't think that we could have that world without some kind of ultimate causal explanation. And Aristotle doesn't think it can be an efficient cause at the beginning of time because he thinks those causes can't go back eternally. So he explains it in terms of a final cause. Aristotle looks at all the changes or motions in the cosmos, and he notices an order among them. Beginning with the sublunar causes in our world, and then looking at the motions of the heavens, he sees them as causing the things below them. He suggests that for all of that infinite series of causation, there must be some kind of cause which is not an efficient cause, but which is a final cause. And it is itself not caused by anything else. Otherwise, you need an explanation for that cause. He calls this cause the prime mover, or the unmoved mover. And he spends extensive time explaining and defending and arguing for the fact that we need to have a prime mover to make sense of causality. How could the unmover cause the movement of everything else? Think about how the apple and the tree might move you. The apple just sits in the tree. It doesn't push you, it draws you. You see the apple and you think, that looks good for food. It looks juicy. I will not add, and to make me intelligent like the gods. We're not talking about the story of the fall here. We see an apple and it attracts our will and we go after it. The apple serves in itself as a final cause for the movement of our will towards the apple. And so Aristotle beautifully tells us and suggestively tells us that the highest cause, the prime mover, moves all the rest of the cosmos by eliciting love. But it in itself is a self-thinking thought. It does not oversee or manage the cosmos. It exists for itself, like the apple exists for itself in the tree, but it attracts all the rest of us toward itself. That is the source of intelligibility in the cosmos.
All right. So I want to kind of just quickly go over the four causes. I know we're running a little bit out of time, but let's see what we can do here. So again, these are the four causes: the material, the formal, the efficient, and the final. The first two we've already kind of talked about, right? The material cause is what the object is made out of. The formal cause, it's the shape, the boundary, right? The design, the blueprint of sorts for the object. And then he kind of introduces the efficient cause and the final cause. The efficient cause is the actual motion or the mover that causes the object to exist. So for example, if you're building a table, the efficient cause would be the carpenter, right, of the table, right? Or unless it's like an IKEA table, the person that puts together all the pieces. And in my household, I am the efficient cause for IKEA furniture, right? The final cause, which it's kind of misnomer if you want to say final, but more of like the purposeful cause is what the object was made for, right? In this case, it's the table is made, for, a dinner table is made to have dinner on it, right? A desk is made to maybe you do your work on top of it, and so on and so forth, right? So he says all the objects in the universe, if they are to exist, if they are to be, have these four material, formal, efficient, final causes that can explain its existence. Right? Makes sense. Good. But now let's try something a little bit more different. Let's talk about, say, the human being. Right? Humans exist. Humans are real. So therefore, they should be able to be explained by these four causes. Right? So again, imagine yourself being Dr. Frankenstein and you are building a human, right? What would be the material cause? Any ideas? What is the material cause of the human?
To live.
The material cause. What is the human made out of?
Oh, matter.
Sorry, say that again?
Matter.
Yeah, like matter, what it's made out of, right? So, you know, in other words, if we're going to the human store to pick up ingredients to build a human, right? We're gonna pick up, you know, arms and legs and, you know, bones and skin and blood and tissue and neurons and eyes and, you know, all the stuff that makes a human, the actual material. Good. What would be the formal cause of the human being?
The body, like the body itself.
What do you mean by that?
I would say like just like a body, how you're saying if you're building a human, you need like a shell, the body, the actual human body, the shell of the soul, I guess.
Okay. And then how would you know how to make a human?
Mm.
Okay, Michelle says the structure of body. What do you mean by that? What is the form of a human?
Sorry, I have my baby whining. I would say, well, I said structure of the body because we know what a human body, the outline of it, right? So
Mhm.
that's what I meant by that.
Good.
Sorry.
Right. So again, if you're building the human, you would say maybe what's the form, what's the design? Okay, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, torso, right? And put it in the proper order. That's the formal cause. Right? You wouldn't have an arm sticking out of the head, right? No, it's like you put it, you know, you balance the body out. That's the form, the formal cause. Okay, what is the efficient cause of human beings? Well, if you're Dr. Frankenstein, you would be the efficient cause, right? But in human beings in general, what is the efficient cause?
Parents,
Okay, your parents. Why do you say that, Brianna?
because you you need a mom and a dad to make you.
Yeah, I'm sorry to bring this up, but a long time ago, your parents had a very efficient night where, because of their motion, they created you, right? Yeah, sorry to bring this up. It's I'll blame it on Aristotle. What is the efficient cause of your parents? In other words, what caused your parents?
Their parents.
Their parents, right?
It's a
Uh,
cycle.
yeah. So in other words, I'm sorry to even say this again. Your grandparents, a long time ago, had a very efficient night where they created your parents as well, and so it kind of goes on, right, in some sort of reverse chain of sorts. And then we have the final cause, right? The purpose of the object. In other words, if we're building a table, we know what it's for. What could be a candidate for the final cause of the human being? What is the final cause of the human? Katia?
Humans are to like create, like make, like they write like movies and television and music and stuff.
Okay, to be creative. Okay, good. Others? Now, just because, for example, a table could be used as a bed, right? Like if you wanted to, you could sleep on top of it, but that's not its actual final cause, right? In other words, what is the actual final cause of the human being, right? For Aristotle, it was like, okay, what do humans do that is uniquely human that no other species or object in this universe can do? And he came up with the idea that we are thinking creatures. Our species differentia, which separates us from other species, is that we're able to rationalize and think deeply, right? Almost to kind of what Katya said is like, in order to be creative, right? You have to kind of use your abstract abilities to deep for deep thinking and reflection, right? You know, this is the purpose. I guarantee you, if you get a job where you're not able to think and be creative for yourself, that you're not going to be happy. Right? That you're not. If you're in a job where you don't exercise your humanness, right, your ability to be social, to be, you know, to think, to be creative, you're not going to be happy. Right? If someone, you know, no matter how much somebody paid you, right? Imagine someone paying you to, you know, act like a piece of furniture all day. Right? It's just like you're just an object. No, you wouldn't last that long at the job, even if it like paid you a lot of money, right? Like, so you know, it's what the object's supposed to be, right? Okay, we're getting here towards the end. We can talk about the four causes for other things, like, I don't know, maybe like the universe, right? And we'll pick up on that next class time, right? So let's not answer number 3 in our exit ticket. We can kind of ignore that one for next class, but I do want you to answer 1 and 2.